So we are here to talk about Interstellar MegaChef. But before that, Lavanya, congratulations on being the first Indian woman to be nominated for the Arthur C. Clarke. So that's quite the achievement. If you've been into sci-fi and all of that, it's only the second time an Indian has been nominated for it. The first was, of course, Amitabh Ghosh. So we are here to talk about this book here, Interstellar MegaChef. Statutory warning, please don't read this book on an empty stomach. Right? So, while this book is about food, it also has a lot of food for thought, and we'll be getting into that over the course of the conversation and hearing it straight from the horse's mouth or the mare's mouth or whatever it is, the current thing is. So, food, right? I did follow the warning because I had a friend tell me that reading certain passages make you hungry, so I did read this on a full stomach. And how did this idea come to you about making food? I mean, when you think about science fiction, you think about like ray guns and robots and alien worlds and all of that, but food, where did it and how did the ingredients come together?
Um, First, thank you so much for your kind words and thank you all for being here. It is lovely to be here with you this evening. Um, when I started thinking about this book, I started thinking about things that haven't been done in science fiction. And food being written about in science fiction is not particularly common, especially when it comes to writing about delicious food, wholesome food. A lot of the time, food in science fiction is really minimalist. We're talking about nutrition pills and nutrition shakes. Um, and this is regardless of the kind of world it's set in. Now, look, if you're in a dystopian setting and there is a complete food shortage, I completely get having synthetic nutrient pills. But a lot of science fiction is set in optimistic, hopeful worlds. And we don't necessarily see food become the focus of science fiction. And that's strange to me because food is such a reflection of who we are as people. Food talks about our cultures, our origins. It's a way to reflect on our privileges, the backgrounds we come from. Also, it's a source of discrimination. You know, there's so much discrimination that happens on the basis of food and food cultures. Science fiction examines all of this through a ton of different lenses, but it doesn't examine it through the lens of food, with notable exceptions, of course. But there's seldom a work of science fiction that says, here is this amazing expression of human creativity that is so foundational to the human experience. We bond over food. We have celebratory dinners. Festivals have food traditions associated with them, but we don't dwell upon it in science fiction a lot. And I thought this is something that I would love to write about. Um, Now, in parallel with this, I had this experience where I was once really quite ill and I completely lost my appetite. And the only thing that I could eat was rasam and rice made by my grandmother. And while I was eating rasam and rice and being nourished back to health by this really everyday food in South India, um, I thought to myself, how is it that more people don't know about this food? What makes food popular in people's imaginations? What makes food translate to different cultures? What foods do we take when we migrate? And then I went down the rabbit hole, read a ton of food history, did a ton of experiments in my kitchen, all with this lens of how can I reflect cultures and food cultures and everything food symbolizes to us as human beings in a science fiction book, which is a bit crazy, and I'm surprised the publisher let me get away with it, and I'm very glad they let me.
No, but what you have said is true as saying in acknowledgement is that food is political. I mean, the only other food related book that I read recently was the Dalit Kitchens of Marathwada, which is a fabulous book, by the way. And one of the lines stuck with me there where they said that, this particular food is a acquired taste. It's a taste acquired through centuries of discrimination. So food in that sense plays a great role. So the way it plays out in this book as well, not just food but cooking methods as well. There's this particular section where, I mean, uh, the protagonist, she's in a cooking competition and she has to cook, and people see her cooking over fire and call it primitive and all of that. Now, where I'm coming from this is that while yes, science fiction is about the future, science fiction is about, the one thing that we tend to forget, that science fiction is a lens to look at the present. Am I right in saying that? Right, and
Absolutely, yes.
is that what you are trying to reflect in Interstellar MegaChef?
Absolutely.
Right,
So
right down to the little political machinations and everything that happened.
yes, because science fiction is a mirror to reality. A lot of present day concerns go into writing science fiction. We're extrapolating these present day concerns into futures that might be 100 years and 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now. But they are all mirrors to who we are as humanity. And when I was writing about this, and I'm glad that you brought up technologies, so much of human history has been determined by food technologies, not just, we talk about technology and we think of iPhones. Even the discovery of fire fundamentally changed the way we cook, it changed the way we eat, and therefore it changed our lifestyle a little bit. You talk about the agricultural revolution and see, the impact that had on how we started to build civilizations, um, all the way to fire, which, by the way, we take for granted here, all across urban India, certainly. Um, but just head to the United States, and half those kitchens have induction stoves because gas is not available to cook with. So even today, now in this future world, um, there's a clash of culinary cultures, a clash of culinary technologies. And we're talking about a very deeply synthesized kind of culinary technology versus earthling tech, which is cooking with fire. Um, this book is set 2,000 years in the future, but that kind of discrimination happens even today because there are fundamental culinary cultures where you need fire to, even a basic tadka needs fire. Now, who are you discriminating against when you don't let people cook over fire? And I wanted to bring all of those concerns and put that in this book. The world we live in today, we're looking at quasi militant vegetarianism taking this country by storm. There are vegetarian only apartment buildings. People are lynched on the basis of, you must be a vegetarian. So, food, for all its wonderful things, is also this deeply problematic space. It's a source of xenophobia. And I wanted to throw all of that, but throw it into the far future because if I had this thought, but I weighed setting it in the near future, again, setting it in the far future, and I
And then this is like very far future in what is called a post-interstellar neo-human culture, as it's
yes,
described in the book, right? So
yes,
it's in the interstellar era where humans have colonized other planet. I mean, maybe colonized is the wrong word in this context. Have settled on other planets and come up with their own civilization. 7 different planets, 7 different cultures as a way of studying things, and it is what is known as the neo-human culture.
yes, and that was a studied decision because I thought if I take this into a future 100 years from now, I'm going to have nothing positive to say about it. And I wanted to say something positive and wholesome about the power of food because if we look at where we're trending, discrimination and bias is all over the place. Violence is escalating continuously. I couldn't see a future 100 years from now where we've learned any lessons. So I'm optimistic in the sense that I think 2,000 years from now, humanity might actually learn from the bad wrongs that we are committing today and be better for it. Which is why I also set this 2,000 years in the future.
The lest people think that we're talking about a cookbook here. No, we're not talking about a cookbook here. The other thing that science fiction also does very well is to see how cultures evolve. And this book is probably one way in which we can see how cultures evolve. So there's this united human collective with this planet at its core, and at the hub of it is all this place called Uru, which, if I'm right, refers to Namauru. Right, great. By the way, I did like all the neologisms like Tenga Nut and all of that,
Thank you.
and Eleuta,
Thank
the
you.
restaurant.
Yes.
Yes, those of your from Bangalore or been in Bangalore enough will catch all of this and love this book that much more for it. Uh, so what happens there is, so they know that Earth culture is their mother culture, but Earth itself is sort of ignored. They want to create a culture of their own, but they know it's rooted in Earth culture. Earth are seen as barbarians. They want to voice their cultures, foreground it a little bit more. How do you see these cultures evolving? I mean, it's a thought experiment. I mean, science fiction, good science fiction, it's a thought experiment. I mean, we're not going to be around 2,000 years down the line to see how cultures evolve. Uh, so, how did you go about and by this path of this, mother culture, but we need to form our own culture? This whole culture clash.
So no culture exists in isolation. No culture develops uniquely, completely, independently on its own, untouched, unless they're on an island, right? That's never been visited ever. Cultures are usually transitive. They're constantly changing and shifting. There are always new influences coming in to shape them, and that's beautiful in my opinion. There's something fundamentally wholesome about the fluidity of a culture where it's able to absorb new influences and yet retain pieces of its past. Now, when I set out to write this book, this is a post climate change, nuclear, Earth. They've learned a few very hard lessons. And in learning those lessons, they decided that humanity also has to escape this Earth because it's very minimally survivable and go out and settle other planets. And when they settle other planets, one of the philosophies that's very dominant is to be minimal, to not repeat the mistakes of the Earth, to be frugal, to respect the natural world around them. But having said that, you're right, they do originate from Earth. So they do take a lot of Earth philosophies with them. Um, and the way
But
I
at the
see
same
it,
time, they want it to be their own, something that they
yes,
can claim, that they can own, you know,
absolutely.
while looking down upon Earth.
And that they can assert. Because what they want to do is to differentiate themselves from this mother culture that spawned them, right? Good, bad, and evil, they did come from the earth. But what they want to do is to be better than the earth ever was, and to sort of be this, I would say, this ultimate culture in terms of the moral imperative that they carry to assert themselves on the rest of the galaxy and say, you know, we are not the earth because the earth messed up. People over there were barbaric, they are barbaric. Now, this is regardless of whether the earth has changed or not,
The audience accepting.
right?
Very literate, very
Yes, yes,
civilized
you are
audience.
not barbarians.
You're not barbarians.
You are not barbarians. But what they want to do really is to impose their worldview upon the entire galaxy from the perspective of being better, doing better. And I think for me, the mirror to our present civilization right now is found in a lot of virtue signaling that we witness, in a lot of, you know, I would say assertions of moral superiority that aren't necessarily followed through in terms of actual action on the ground. And so,
It's enough if you do it on Instagram.
it is, right? Say it once on Twitter.
That works. That's plan B.
So that's where it comes from. Um, this need to be different, but to also, I think, I would say, almost not acknowledge your cultural origins. I feel like this is a thing when people form their new cultures and they decide that they need to assert a separate identity, despite the fact that perhaps there is a root that they come from. Um, there's almost an embarrassment regarding that root, right? And these people are very embarrassed of the fact that they all came from Earth, because present company excluded, the Earth are barbarians. And so that's where it comes from, and this leads to a lot of tension that's very passive aggressively woven through the novel. It's effectively the same as a lot of microaggressions that we witness, between dominant cultures and less represented cultures all over the world.
I mean, there's a lot to get into this book here in terms of the world building, about the nakshatrans and the cultures of Primus and the technology and all of it. I mean, it's sort of quite deep, and we don't have time for that because I have this huge countdown ticker staring at me saying how much time I have left, and I would like to keep some time for you guys also to have some Q&A and interact with it. So one thing that I would like to ask is, when I was reading this, I was reminded about this other book by Catherine Valente, Space Opera. Very funny book. Basically, that it was Eurovision in space, right? So Catherine Valente's space opera is Eurovision in space, whereas this is the Great British Bake Off in space, or Master Chef meets Star Trek, right? So is this a trend of taking popular, beloved, well-known pop culture artifacts and using them as a framework or as a starting point to examine issues and all, and while setting it in the future and see how it could happen? I mean, where do you see this going?
So I think pop culture is very telling on who we are as people, because its very definition, right? These are popular representations of ourselves that we experience and engage with,
And collectively love.
and collectively love. It's not something you experience in isolation. MasterChef has fandoms. The Great British Bake Off has fandoms. Star Trek has fandoms. And I think there's something very powerful about seeing these representations on the screen, for better or for worse, because pop culture can dictate so much about how gender is coded, for example, how maybe certain identities are perceived. And when you look at something like reality TV, which is what this book is in some part, right? We're looking at something like MasterChef. Reality TV has real, regular people, and it throws them into absurd situations with absolutely ridiculously high pressure stakes. And all of it is filmed. There's something very kind of unnerving and surreal about it. I mean, you think it's bad that we live half our lives on Instagram. There's somebody following you around with a camera recording everything that you say and do. And I think that sort of opens a window into certain aspects of humanity. And I feel like it's fascinating to explore that through science fiction, because science fiction is a mirror to so much of reality. And in doing so, when you talk about Kat Valente's book, and I recently saw an announcement for a book that's The Bachelor in Space. It's by Sierra Branham. It's a debut.
The Bachelor in Space.
Yeah, it's pretty much The Bachelor in Space, right? It's definitely something that I think science fiction writers are leaning into, because there is, when we consume reality TV, there's a certain element of voyeurism involved in it. And I think it is fascinating to view your own voyeurism through the lens of being a writer, and then write about it and meditate on what that evokes, both as a writer and a reader. So I definitely think it's a fascinating area.
Right. So, okay, we got exactly 9 minutes 5 seconds. So let's open this up. If anyone has any questions, I would like you to keep it questions and not more of a comment type things that we usually have. Yeah. Yes. Here, the gentleman in that lime green T-shirt. You can. Yeah. Sure. Sure.
Yeah. Hi. I just since we are talking about dystopian fiction, and dystopian fiction is often written as a kind of warning. It can be taken as a warning sign of where we are going, and kind of don't go down this path. But I think it could also, if you are exposed to too much dystopian fiction, you might also just get depressed about the future of the world and a bit apathetic. So I don't know where you see. You kind of see this. Where do you come down on this? Like, in the sense that obviously, I guess you would want to be inspiring people to avoid the kind of dystopias you describe. But maybe does it also sort of just kind of make people apathetic towards the future?
So, thank you for the question. This book is not actually very dystopian. It is an ambiguous utopia. So when I say that, I mean it is utopia for some people, but it is quite dystopian for others. And when I write, I tend not to take the moral high ground and write about the single one correct way to live or to do a thing, but rather to showcase as many perspectives as possible, or multiple perspectives. So this has about 4 characters that you follow from different walks of life, and you take a look at how this ambiguous utopia impacts each of them. My first novel is a mosaic novel. There are 20 different perspectives in it. And that is absolutely potentially dystopian, but it depends on whose perspective you're looking at it from. And I think that's where I approach dystopias from, because everyone's dystopia is somebody's utopia, which is why it exists in the first place. And everyone's utopia does not work out for everybody in that world. Utopias also are determined by a dominant perspective and a dominant culture. So when I write, yes, there is that element of it being a warning, but there's also an element of looking at it as sort of a puzzle. Who am I in this environment, and how does this environment affect me? And for some people, it works out great, and for others, it doesn't. And my intent is to make readers think about who they're rooting for and what it tells them about themselves. I hope that.
Yeah, I mean, you look up Ursula Le Guin and Ambiguous Utopia, you'll probably get your answers. And like Atwood said when asked about Handmaid's Tale and it's so dystopian and all, she said that there's nothing in this book that isn't happening in the world right now when she wrote it, right? So when you say dystopia, dystopia for whom, right? And yes, it's a warning. I wish tech companies would take it as a warning and not use dystopian fiction as sort of how-to instruction guides. Next question, please.
Hi. So my question is more about the very nature of science fiction and how and certain tropes that authors like to go with. Even in classics like Hyperion and modern classics like The Expanse and your book as well, humans love to escape the Earth, found a new reality for themselves instead of fixing what we already have. I just wanted to know your thoughts on this. Do you think it's because humans are fundamentally lazy, don't want to fix what they already have, and want to go for the new shiny thing, or do you think it's because people have given up, or they want to just get a fresh start instead of it being a more pessimistic view like the new shiny thing? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that is a fantastically multi-layered question. As a writer, creating escape routes from the earth, for me personally, when I write, it gives me a way to view the world more positively, to not be mired. My first book is a dystopian future, and it's set on the earth.
And it's set in Bangalore, by
And
the
it's
way.
set in Bangalore. And it was very difficult for me to find optimism working with the reality that we occupy and the way we are treating our planet right now. So as a writer, it induces more hope to start afresh. Now, if I go into my characters' mindsets and into the worlds that I'm building, the characters in this book have in some part given up on the earth. They find that there are some problems that are unsolvable. There is too much baggage and history of discrimination, violence, oppression, and they yearn for a fresh start, which is why they leave. And I think there's something to remark upon. You've probably hit the nail on the head there. Human beings, I think if we were given the opportunity to start afresh and just say, let's found a colony based on our common values, somewhere on a distant rock around another star, a lot of people will grab it. And especially in a sort of a scarcity based earth or something, there are always going to be people who are going to escape. Inevitably, they will be the tech bros, because they will have the money and they will have SpaceX and they will get on those ships and leave. And
You
so-
won't believe the number of people who signed up for a one-way ticket to Mars.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And so I think that we are always looking for the easy way out. It is much harder to roll up your sleeves, dig in, and say, let's fix this and let's all work together. So, layered answer.
Yeah.
Hi. So when we're talking about the planetary or intergalactic travel, is when humanity as a whole is, collectively we talk about it. But here on Earth, we are never like human race. We are nationalities and we are classes and we are castes. So whenever the travel happens, do you think the humans will be of diverse, the diversity will be represented, or it will be, the elite who are moving out, and then there will be an extinction of again, I think it's the origin of the species kind of a thing, where the strongest survive and then everything else gets extinct.
Before you answer that, let me just read out the first event that's mentioned on the first page of this book. 1 Anno Earth. Nationhood collapses on Earth, giving rise to a new united human civilization that calls itself One Nation Earth. Yeah.
Thank you. So I mean, in a post-nation world, I believe there is hope for that diversity and representation where everyone will have opportunities to travel. And assuming the Earth is a wasteland, everyone will have the opportunity to save themselves and leave. But this requires a massive transformation of who we are as humanity right now. You know, the national divisions, caste, class, race, all of this is detrimental to this vision coming true. As long as we have billionaires, as long as we have limited access, development concentrated in the global north, they're going to be the ones who get to leave. And that's just the sad reality. But my optimistic version of the earth in this world is that it is post nation. And with post nation, a lot of these divisive identity markers have been worked on, they've been corrected, and people feel a lot more equal in some capacity, depending on where you are on it.
I guess we have time for one more question. Okay, I think the mic is gone.
So,
somewhere else.
because this book is set in the future, what is your view on the use of technology to write a book? You know, you can train ChatGPT and other AI tools to write in your own voice. Is this a good disruption, or you prefer old school?
I think it's a horrific disruption, personally. I think it infringes upon the rights of writers to be creative. It's disrespectful to artists, writers, musicians all over the world who spend lifetimes honing a craft, working on figuring out perfect sentence structure, perfect artistic structure, understanding music on a truly deep level. And in its current form, can it change? Of course it can, right? But it needs the right, I would say, the right axis to be developed in order to shape that change. Right now, all these LLMs that you're looking at are ripping off writers. They are infringing copyrights, they don't care. And they are targeted towards producing books overnight. Um, if this structure can change, possibly there's hope, but I don't see that happening because it's far more lucrative to eliminate effort, price efficiency, and mass produce by stealing from people than it is to give upcoming writers, new writers, even experienced writers, time and space to hone a voice, to execute a certain type of vision. So I'm very bleak about it. I absolutely abhor it.
I mean, you should definitely read what Ted Chiang has to say on this subject. You definitely have to. So whenever you have the time, read what Ted Chiang has to say on this subject, and you'll see why she's right and why that's quite detrimental to art with a capital A, be it in any form. Okay, time's up. Press delete to reset, escape to exit. Right, is there one more after this? There is one more after this. All right. Okay, fine. Do we have time for one last question? I mean, because, I mean, they're all upstanding people. Look at him. I mean, we decided these people are all civilized people, right? So one last question. Okay, and also before she runs out, the bookstore is right opposite, so you can get this from there and get it signed by her. We have time for one last question. That no, this gentleman has been raising his hand. Stand up. You don't need a mic here. Come on.
So very short question for you. You talked about world building. Very short question for you. You talked about world building and dystopian world. So, like, what were some authors or books that inspired you as when you were starting as a writer, and that inspired this book?
Wow. Okay. So questions about things that inspire me are this. There is a murky rabbit hole because I have been absorbing things from around the world, the things that I consume for decades now. In terms of, I would say, direct influences, there's Samit Basu, phenomenal. There's, of course, Tolkien, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell, all the classics. In the more contemporary age, N.K. Jemisin is fabulous. Yeah, I mean, it's a really long list. It's got everything from Douglas Adams to Terry Pratchett to Ursula Le Guin, and it's a whole spectrum.